Former U.S. Ambassador to the UN, John Bolton, is in Israel this week as part of his new membership with the Friends of Israel organization. Bolton sat down with the staff of the Jerusalem Post to give his opinion on Iran, President Obama, and the Palestinian unilateral bid for a state in the UN.
The result is essentially foreordained. This resolution is going to pass almost no matter what it says because there's a built-in majority to do that. So I think there need to be essentially two responses to it. The first is not to pay any attention to it and to care no more about it than the grass you tread beneath your feet. The General Assembly has no authority to create a state of Palestine, to recognize a state of Palestine, or any other state. And if you make the General Assembly into something more than it is, then you're giving it authority and legitimacy that it doesn't have. I'm not saying this vote won't have political ramifications like Zionism is racism. Of course it'll have political ramifications, but it has no binding significance. But if there is any possibility of stopping it, it will come only if Congress passes legislation that says we're going to cut off funding to the UN. There have already been resolutions that say we'll cut off funding to the Palestinian Authority, which is interesting but essentially irrelevant because the Europeans don't believe that ultimately we'll do that. And in any event, they don't care because they'll fund the Palestinian Authority if Fatah and Hamas make a deal. The only way to get the Europeans' attention or anybody else is not to threaten the Palestinian Authority or Hamas or Fatah, but to threaten the UN. That's what we did in 1989. It was successful then. It could be successful now. Obviously, the Obama administration isn't going to do that, so Congress has to pass legislation. And if you're going to spend a lot of time and trouble opposing the resolution, that's where I would do it. Obama is the most anti-Israel president in the history of the state, beyond any question. And if you think this is just a misunderstanding on sort of where the green crayon went in 1949, think again. Now that diplomacy and sanctions aren't going to work, doing nothing will simply result in Iran getting nuclear weapons. They're working away on their ballistic missile program together with the North Koreans. So that there are only two options. One is preemptive military force used against key aspects of the Iranian program, or the other is in as soon as 12 months, Iran has nuclear weapons, and fairly soon after that, a delivery capability with ballistic missiles. The Obama administration certainly isn't going to use force against the Iranian program, and Israel's obviously very reluctant to do it as well for all the reasons you understand. But if Israel's not prepared to strike, then get ready for Iran with nuclear weapons, and you can draw your own conclusions. If you think Iran's behavior is bad now, imagine what it will be once it has a nuclear weapons capability. And I think we're all sleepwalking right past this. I think the Obama administration's real plan B for the Iranian nuclear weapons program is that Iran can be contained and deterred, much as we contained and deterred the Soviet Union during the Cold War. I think that is fundamentally wrong. I think this is a radically different strategic situation, number one. And number two, why anybody wants to live under the threat of nuclear holocaust is beyond me anyway. The only way to deal with this, I think, is to stop Iran from getting nuclear weapons to begin with, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But I don't think that's the view of the Obama administration. So they believe in containment and deterrence working against an Iranian nuclear capability.
Following Bolton's initial comments, he took questions from the present J-Post staff members.
How do you explain then that others, including Obama, don't share this sense of alarm that you have regarding Iran? You seem to be out on your own saying, if we don't do something now, it's going to be too late.
Well, as I say, in the Obama administration, I think that they would say, look, it's a bad thing for Iran to have nuclear weapons, but it's not so bad, not so dangerous that we have to do something risky like preemptive military strike. We can live with it. We won't like it, but we can live with a nuclear Iran because we believe a policy of containment and deterrence will succeed.
I'd be interested to know what you think Iran would do if it got the bomb where Israel's concerned. And I wonder if you feel that that Israel has been too slow to act already. And if you can elaborate a little bit more on Herb's question about Meir Dagan, I find Meir Dagan's resort to publicity so uncharacteristic as to be unfathomable. Here is a person whose essence is to protect the state of Israel, taking a position that would apparently be interpreted as encouraging the Iranians to feel that they are immune, and it just doesn't make any sense to me.
I used to meet with him every time I came to Israel, and we talked a lot about the Iranian program, so I'm absolutely confounded at what he had to say, and it's simply not accurate either. It's a little bit like the 2007 National Intelligence Estimate in the United States, and it is very destructive, and it will take time to get over it, and it's not an estimate that's shared even by the Obama administration, let alone, I think, by the rest of Israeli intelligence. So I'm not a shrink. I don't know what motivated him to do it, but I just think factually it's incorrect in a lot of respects. Now, once Iran gets nuclear weapons, it doesn't have to use nuclear weapons to have an enormous impact. Certainly within the region and within Islam, in the struggle between the Saudis on the one hand and Sunni versus Shia and whatnot, and expanding Iran's influence in the Persian Gulf region and throughout the Middle East, in Syria, in Lebanon, with Hamas, into the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt and the rest of it. Everything you don't like about Iran now gets infinitely worse once it has nuclear weapons. If I had been in charge of the Israeli government, I would have attacked in 2008 for several reasons. First, it's 3 years ago, so you're much more likely really to have eliminated the key elements of Iran's nuclear weapons program. And by so doing, it doesn't mean you just set them back to time where they put one brick back on another. That in itself also fundamentally changes the dynamic inside Iran. And in 2008, you had a president in Washington sympathetic to Israel. So you calculate when the next time that event is going to occur.
You had said earlier that the GA has no authority to create a state of Palestine, and it basically has no binding significance. And I was wondering if I could ask you, is there any irony in arguing that, given that the General Assembly was instrumental in creating the State of Israel, first in the partition plan, and then, well, the partition plan, and then in 48?
There's only one body in the United Nations that has authority to bind member governments, and that's the Security Council. Whatever the General Assembly adopts, that it likes oatmeal cookies, it's a recommendation, and that's it. So Israel was not created by the United Nations. Israel was created by the collapse of the British mandate and the force of Israeli arms.
Do you support the campaign that there is right now to try to bring about the release of Jonathan Pollard?
You know, I don't have much sympathy for anybody who spies against the United States. I don't care who they're spying for. Pollard's case, from the perspective of compassionate release, has a lot to recommend it, but there's also a lot clearly going on behind the scenes that I didn't know when I was in the government. I didn't ask to find out, and I certainly don't know now about exactly what his activities were that have led authorities in Republican and Democratic administrations not to agree to an appeal for clemency. And my guess is that there's something that nobody in this room knows, that I don't know, but that is the source of the explanation why he hasn't been released.
You referred earlier to the worrying unknown unknowns of the Iranian nuclear diffusion of their centers. How can we or America or anyone attack attack installations if we don't know where they are, and B, we read from time to time about the incredible security that surrounds these plants, how deeply they're buried in the earth, and so on. My question is simply, how sure could anybody be that an attack would succeed? That's really it. And do we have bearing in mind the terrible backlash that would come in all sorts of forms, terrorism, missiles, and so on?
But right now, on uranium conversion, the only facility they have that we know about is at Esfahan, and it's all above ground, and we know exactly where it is. And we know, with respect to the uranium enrichment facility at Natanz, not only where it is, but how deeply buried it is and how much reinforced concrete it has. The IAEA has been all over that facility, and it can be destroyed. Now, Israel would not do it exactly the same way the United States does it. The U.S. Air Force defines destroying a facility like that as getting a bomb underneath the facility and blowing it off its foundations. You know, that is when they cross it off and say destroyed. But if weapons went off inside those centrifuge halls and disrupted those machines, and tossed them to the ground, they'd be worthless and you'd have to start over even if the hall itself still existed. So the U.S. would do a much better job than Israel, but Israel could do a sufficient job.